And you see this kind of propaganda aimed at dividing Sunnis from Shias all over the place these days. And I'm very disappointed in the number of Muslims who fall for this.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It wasn't as big of an issue before. It's become more militarized or more mechanized or weaponized. What is the word I'm looking for? It's become more weaponized. I first saw it in Iraq when I saw the reports coming, and this is just around the time when they're setting up the green zone. You had people like John Negroponte running around, and all of a sudden death squads start popping up. So they were poaching certain people or bribing certain people, cherry-picking them from Shiite militias to form death squads, and mixed in with some radical Sunnis as well. And they wanted to basically dismantle Sadr's army, but dismantle any real militia opposition in Iraq. And that was going to be a long process. They knew it was going to be a long process. It was going to cost a lot of money and a lot of soldiers to basically wear that thing down to the point now where they've almost sort of gotten rid of it. And you notice how ISIS had a cakewalk through northern Iraq. You know, that would not have happened 15 years ago, because there would have been, with the amount of militia, Shiite militia that would have been organized and active, they wouldn't have been able to sort of ponce around and take towns and villages. It wouldn't have happened. So you look at how much trouble they're having when they encounter Hezbollah, who've come into Syria to help clean out some of the towns and cities. They would have that same trouble in Iraq. But the U.S. really played upon this division, and this is how the Western mentality, the colonial mentality, will look at. They look at it like it's a sporting event, and they say, well, where are the cracks there? They did this with Libya too. They managed to find the cracks in Gaddafi's ministers and cabinets, and went and identified some of those people early, got in touch with them, started working with them in advance of the overthrow of that government. This is the same thing in Iraq too. They'll look at the cracks and they'll try to exploit that in order to maintain control. The British were brilliant at this, and they ended up splitting one of the largest countries in the world into three parts, India, strictly along sectarian lines or religious lines. And the U.S. have learned from the best, and the British are the best at that. They understand what the culture differences are, the religious differences are on the ground, and they'll play that very cleverly in a Machiavellian kind of way. The U.S. is just taking that to another level with a bit of brute force, and creating some of these Cyclops organizations like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and they've gotten slightly out of control. This is the other problem, Kevin, is that it starts off as a false narrative, Sunni versus Shia, but if you inject enough violence into it over a long enough period of time, it will actually become real after a certain number of years. And I think this is the unfortunate thing that we're seeing in the Middle East, is that it has become real, but it's only become real because of the constant injecting of money and guns and foreign fighters and toxic news coverage into that situation has created a sectarian problem that will last for a generation. And that, to me, is the big tragedy, especially from Iraq forward.
I agree. Iraq's 9/11, in a sense, was the bombing of the Golden Dome on February 22nd, 2006. And people who were there, witnesses, reported that in the night before the bombing, which occurred in the very wee hours of the morning, U.S. troops actually surrounded it and chased off everybody and cordoned it off. And so this was obviously an inside job to be blamed on extremist Sunnis. And then they also have done all sorts of bombings of mosques and markets. It's usually not Muslims who bomb anybody's mosque, unless they really get crazed and desperate. But to get it going, I think that the occupation in Iraq did a lot of false flags going after civilians, going after mosques, and now it's taken on a life of its own.
That's documented, Kevin. Those false flags you're talking about that's not conspiracy theory. Those have been reported even in mainstream media. So that's very real what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, one of the examples was those British Special Forces guys dressed up as Arabs who were arrested in Basra. They were heading for a market. They were going to blow up a market, and they had all the explosives and weapons in their car. They got arrested, and the British brought in tanks to knock down the walls of the prison in Basra to free their special forces false flag terrorists.
Yep.
And all the prisoners escaped. So they freed hundreds and hundreds of prisoners just so that, so they could get these guys out. And, just to shift gears a little bit, that huge Golden Dome bombing that was the biggest of all the iconic sorts of sectarian inspiring false flags in Iraq happened on the 22nd of February. And I was going over these sort of 9/11s of other countries, these big shock and awe events that have changed everything for these countries. And in a lot of them, the number 11 comes up, just like with the JFK assassination, we have 1122. That's like two multiples of 11 in three numbers. That's pretty interesting. But here we've got, 9/11, of course. We've got the Spanish 9/11 was on 3/11/04. Okay,
Madrid.
So 11. We've got the UK's 9/11 was 7/7, but if you put 7 and 7 together, you got 77, a multiple of 11. So we'll set that aside. Iraq's Golden Dome was on 2/22. India's 9/11 was 11/26 in Mumbai. Norway's 9/11 was on 7/22/11. Okay, and Canada's 9/11 was on 10/22. We just passed the first anniversary of that, 22 being another multiple. And France's 9/11 was, it culminated on the first Charlie Hebdo attack was on the 7th of January last year, but then the big march of the millions of lemmings with the identical Je suis Charlie signs was on 1/11. An unusually high percentage of these seem to feature the number 11, and if you actually go over it statistically, the chances should be, if you have, let's say, just the first two dates, the month and the day, there's two chances to get 11. So that's a 1 in 11 chance. Just call it 1 in 10 for simplicity. So you got two of those. That would be a 2 in 10 or 1 in 5 chance. But when you list all these countries' 9/11s and you find that 3/4 plus of them all have an 11 there, you're beating the odds. And so these numerologist types who say that there's something fishy going on here, that maybe whoever's behind this is interested in these numbers, I don't know if they're all crazy.
Oh, so you're saying that 11 is the new 13?
There you go.
It's going to be the new 13.
Captain Eric May pioneered this line of research, and when I first heard him talking, I thought he was, crazy. But after I looked into, and then the number of days between 9/11 and which was it, Madrid bombing? I think it was like 911 days exactly. So Eric May showed me all this stuff, and at first I thought he was nuts, and then I don't know.
Well, these patterns do occur in the universe and in the natural world too. You see recurring patterns, and they might seemingly be unexplainable, but in fact, it points to also possibility of some grand design, at least on that binary level. So it's certainly possible. I wouldn't count it out because it does occur in so many other places in the universe. So it's like, why wouldn't it occur as well with events and related events and things like that? It's very possible, of course.
Right. Well, I'm a conspiracy theorist in the sense that I think that a lot of these great crimes are not done by lone nuts or whoever the patsy is supposed to be. But I'm also, a coincidence theorist. Now, we always insult the coincidence theorists who, try to explain away obvious conspiracies by saying it's a coincidence. But I am a coincidence theorist in the sense that I do believe that there are these meaningful coincidences that just get generated, by the universe, or you call them signs of God, or call them whatever you want. Synchronicities is what Carl Jung called them. These meaningful coincidences where meaning just jumps into the world in a way that would totally destroy any kind of odds. Jung gave us millions of examples of this, but everybody's experienced these things. And so is that what you were suggesting? Yeah,
exactly. So, it's either that or it's the guy like in Time Bandits, the super technocrat dictator, psychopath who's engineering events according to the numerology, because everything has to be spaced out exactly so that they can manage all the fallout in between. It's either that or it's what you just said, which is the Carl Jungian meaningful coincidence patterns that form around people and events. So,
or maybe it's some combination thereof.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly. but it is interesting. I mean, instinct comes into play, not just, anyone who's good at anything they do, whether, even if you're a soldier or you're, a teacher or you're a coach or you're a manager, or you're an engineer or you're a scientist or you're a musician, instinct comes into play. It's one of the biggest, most underrated X factors, in the course of, people and events. And, certainly, that instinct is, how do you measure instinct? Is it natural? Is it calculated? Maybe some might say that it is. It's just so advanced we can't articulate it. But if I say that I work on instinct, people say, "Oh, that's crazy." There's no such thing as instinct. But everyone knows there is. So you can easily extend the same thing to meaningful patterns and coincidences that are happening throughout the timeline. I don't see why not, because it's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, intuition or instinct is very underrated in this culture. I was recently talking with Dr. Nick Begich, who was the guy, co-author of The Angels Don't Play This Harp, about the harp array in Alaska. And very interesting guy. He's an expert on mind control. His dad was killed by the usual suspects, the same people that killed JFK, took down the plane with Hale Boggs and Nick's dad. It was right after the election in '72 that Nixon won, and he, of course, would later be impeached. But yeah, apparently they took down that plane with Hale Boggs, who was the guy in the JFK movie who alerts the Jim Garrison character, played by Kevin Costner, to the fact that the Warren Commission was full of it. Right? He was on the commission. Hale Boggs was on the commission, and so he told Jim Garrison that their commission was a crock. And anyway, they took down that plane with Begich and Hale Boggs in fall of '72. So Nick Begich grew up having his dad killed by the same guys that killed JFK, and that sent him on a path of peeling back the surfaces and looking for what's crawling around underneath. He's been doing it ever since. Anyway, he said that he has learned to really trust his intuition and instinct to the point that it's he's able to be guided through life doing this routinely. And
yeah,
it's sounded,
a lot of successful people, Kevin, will say the exact same thing. I've heard it from many different people that I would consider very successful, like in their field, like the top, and they say that they say they go through life, they make all of their decisions and their plans, and they strategize based on intuition and instinct. And
Nick said that you can develop this. He says meditation develops it, and both ordinary meditation and then these kinds of enhanced forms of meditation, binaural beat technology and things like that. Meditation apparently connects the two hemispheres of your brain. Human brain, has these two largely independent hemispheres connected by this thin thread called the corpus callosum. And when your two hemispheres are in a normal state of consciousness, they're out of sync. They have totally different brainwave patterns because they're running independently. But when you meditate, and your brainwaves slow down and you start getting really relaxed and peaceful, your two hemispheres start to sync up. And slower your brainwaves, the more they sync up. And this supposedly, actually, according to Nick, builds up the corpus callosum so that you get more communication between your brain hemispheres, and that the input from that right hemisphere, the holistic processing unit, can be injected into your ordinary consciousness, which is normally more focused in the left hemisphere in this culture, where we're so logical and linear. And so you get these intuitive flashes. And, so he says you can actually enhance your intuition through meditation.
Yeah, it's called coherence. So when you got the different brain waves, the delta, the theta, all the different frequencies, different hertz. Each of them correspond to a different electrical hertz. And then when they're both, like you said, when you're meditating, then you have coherence, and they're basically vibrating. The waves are the same size on both sides of your brain. You can actually see it on there are computers that can image this according to the electrical activity coming out of the brain, and you could theoretically, using the biofeedback, train you to sort of do this with a visual aid, but people have been doing it for thousands of years without computers, so it's not necessary that you need any fancy gadgets to achieve that. I think they've been doing it in Tibet for about 6,000 or 7,000 years.
Yeah. Well, there's the Sufi meditation too. It involves chanting. And a lot of these meditation forms do involve kind of chanting these formulas, whether it's Om or mantras or Sufi dhikrs. But I think I hear some brain entrainment noises going on. I have to train my brain right out of this show. But hey, thank you so much, Patrick Henningsen. It's always great talking with you. I appreciate your astounding insights.
Thanks, Kevin. Take care.
Okay, you too. Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire. I'm Kevin Barrett of TruthJihad.com. Go to TruthJihad.com and click on the radio link. You'll find out all about these shows. You can even join at TruthJihad.com. I'm going to be traveling for a while, so I may not be on the live show next couple of weeks. I'll see you all when I get back.